In the damp autumn of 1910, deep in the Arkansas woods, a widow named Martha Langley lived alone in a small pinewood cabin. Her husband, Elias, had passed 2 winters before, crushed beneath a fallen oak while hunting for firewood during a storm. Since his death, Martha's days had grown quiet and hollow, the kind of silence that hums in your ears when the world forgets you exist. Her nearest neighbor lived 7 miles down the dirt road, and the mail came only once a week by horse. She kept her mind busy by tending her garden, mending clothes, and talking to the photographs of Elias she kept by the window. But when dusk fell, when the forest turned black and the cicadas quieted, she swore she could still hear his boots on the porch, sometimes a soft creak in the ceiling, sometimes a faint shuffle, as if someone were moving above her. Yet there was no room above her head. The cabin had only one floor and a low roof. It began one night in late October. The wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls, and Martha sat near the fire knitting socks. The flames crackled, the old clock ticked, then creak. A sound directly above her chair. She froze, looked up. The roof beams groaned again, not from wind but from weight, like a person shifting their stance. She whispered, "Elias?" before she even realized it. The room was still again, except for the beating of her heart. She stood, took the oil lamp, and stepped outside into the night air. The cold bit her cheeks. The stars were dim through a haze of fog. She looked at the roof. Nothing. Just pine shingles, slick with dew. And yet, when she returned inside and bolted the door, she heard it again. A single, deliberate step above her bed. 2 days later, while gathering kindling near the creek, Martha ran into old Silas Turner, a traveling tinker who visited the woods every few months. He was a wiry man with a limp and a knack for listening to gossip. When Martha mentioned the footsteps, Silas paused. "You sure it ain't a raccoon or a squirrel?" he asked, but his eyes betrayed something uneasy. She shook her head. "Too heavy. Too slow." He scratched his chin. "Well, these woods hold memories, Miss Langley. Sometimes, when folks leave too sudden, they don't always leave all the way." Martha frowned. "You mean a ghost?" Silas spat into the dirt. "I don't like that word, but I'd keep a Bible near if I were you." That night, she set her husband's old Bible on the nightstand, but when the clock struck midnight, she heard the footsteps again, slower this time, like someone pacing. She whispered a prayer, but deep down, part of her didn't want it to stop. Days grew shorter. The woods filled with mist that crept like fingers through the trees. One morning, Martha woke to find boot prints outside her cabin door, muddy, large, and fresh. They led up from the trail, circled the porch, then stopped beneath her window. Her hands trembled as she followed them. The prints ended at the wall. No return path, no signs of leaving. It was as if whoever made them had simply vanished into the air. That evening, as she stirred her stew, she heard a faint tap, tap, tap above her again. This time she spoke aloud, voice trembling. "If you're trying to tell me something, Elias, then speak it plain." A moment of silence. Then 3 taps, clear and steady, like a response. She covered her mouth, tears spilling down. For the first time since his death, she whispered, "I'm listening." The following afternoon, while hanging laundry, Martha noticed movement among the trees. A small figure darting between trunks. At first, she thought it a deer. Then she saw a child, no older than 10, with tangled hair and a torn shirt. She called out, "You lost, sweetheart?" The boy froze. His eyes were wide, hollow, and before she could take a step toward him, he bolted into the forest. Martha followed as far as she dared, but the woods grew thick, and the shadows swallowed him. When she returned home at dusk, exhausted, she heard the familiar creak above. Only now, It didn't sound like Elias's heavy boots. It sounded like bare feet. That night Martha dreamed of water, dark and deep, flooding her cabin. A voice called from below, not above this time. "Help me." She woke drenched in sweat, the sound of dripping echoing in her ears. When she stepped onto the floor, a cold wetness met her toes. The wood near the fireplace was damp, yet the roof didn't leak and no rain had fallen. She knelt down and pressed her ear to the boards. For a second, she thought she heard breathing. Then, faintly, a whisper, "Don't be afraid." She jumped back, her heart pounding. The footsteps above her began again, as if whoever, or whatever, was up there wanted to protect her from what lay beneath. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Martha decided to investigate. She fetched a ladder and climbed outside, checking the roofline carefully. From above, she realized something odd. The cabin's roof seemed longer than the room below. There was an extra section she'd never noticed, as if the cabin had been built with a sealed attic, but the inside showed no hatch, no stairs, no entrance. Determined, she fetched a hammer and lantern, then climbed onto a chair beneath the rafters inside. She tapped along the ceiling, hollow. Her pulse quickened. She began to pry loose a board. When it finally gave way, a rush of cold, stale air poured down, and with it, the faint smell of smoke and something else. Earthy, like decay. Martha hoisted herself up through the narrow gap, her lantern shaking in her hand. The hidden space was no more than 3 feet tall, a crawl space covered in dust, but there, in the far corner, was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She crawled closer. The bundle was a child's blanket, old, dirt-stained, and tied with string. Inside, she found a tiny wooden toy horse, cracked from age, and beneath it, a yellowed note written in shaky script. "Forgive me. I couldn't let them find him. He's safe now." E.L. quote. Her heart stopped. Those were her husband's initials. She sat frozen, the sound of her own breath loud in her ears. Had Elias hidden a child? Protected someone? The footsteps, the whispers, suddenly made sense in ways she didn't want to understand. The next morning, Martha couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the letter and the toy horse. She returned to the attic crawl space, hoping she'd missed something. This time, she noticed the boards beneath the bundle were uneven, as if someone had pried them up before. With trembling fingers, she lifted one. Below lay a small cavity in the ceiling beams, and inside, a folded scrap of newspaper from 1904. The headline read, "Runaway Orphan Found Dead, Near. Fort Smith, Suspect at Large." Tears welled in her eyes. The boy in the woods, the bare feet above her bed. Was the spirit of that lost child still here? Or had Elias somehow been part of hiding him? That night, as the wind moaned through the trees, the footsteps returned, but slower, softer, almost sorrowful. A storm rolled through the valley. Rain hammered the roof, thunder splitting the sky. Martha sat awake, clutching the toy horse in her hands. "Elias," she whispered through tears, "what did you do?" The lightning flashed, and in that blinding moment she saw it. A small shadow at the edge of her room, standing by the wall, dripping as though from rain. A boy's silhouette, barefoot, staring up at the ceiling. When she blinked, he was gone. But above, the footsteps began once more, crossing slowly toward the center of the roof. Then, silence. The storm eased, and a soft voice filled the room. A boy's voice, gentle and tired. "He saved me. He hid me till it was safe." Martha fell to her knees. The tears she wept that night weren't of fear, but understanding. Whatever her husband had done, it hadn't been out of guilt, but love. love for a child he'd saved, and love for a wife he still tried to comfort from beyond the grave. The next morning dawned pale and heavy with fog. Martha barely slept. The toy horse and the note from her husband lay on the table, their presence both a comfort and a burden. She couldn't shake the boy's voice from her mind. He saved me. He hid me till it was safe. What had Elias done? And what became of the boy afterward? She decided to look for answers the only way she knew, by revisiting the place her husband had died, the old oak clearing half a mile from the cabin. The forest was still damp from the storm, the air smelling of earth and pine. When she reached the fallen oak, its trunk mossy and broken, she noticed the ground beside it looked uneven, as if someone had buried something there long ago. She knelt and brushed away leaves. Beneath the roots, her fingers struck metal. A small tin box. Inside, a torn photograph of Elias, standing with a young boy beside him, the same face she'd seen in the woods. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, "For Martha." When it's safe to tell her, Martha pressed the photo to her chest, sobbing into the wind. She realized Elias hadn't been haunted. He'd been protecting a secret of mercy. That evening, Martha returned to the cabin and searched through her husband's old trunk. Inside, among hunting tools and tobacco tins, she found a bundle of letters tied with twine. Most were receipts and church notes, but one, unsent, was addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Martha, if you find this, it means the world knows what I could not confess. The boy's name is Samuel. His mother was gone, his father cruel. I found him lost by the river and took him in. The law would call it kidnapping, but I could not let them take him back. I built a hiding place for him above us until we could leave these woods. Forgive me for what I've done. It was love, not sin, that guided me." Elias Martha sat in silence for a long time. Every sound, every footstep, every whisper in the ceiling now felt like a story of protection, not haunting. When the wind blew through the chimney that night, she whispered back to it, "He's forgiven, Elias. You both are." The next morning, while drawing water from the well, Martha saw movement through the mist again. There he was, the boy in the woods, standing near the tree line, watching her quietly. But this time, he didn't run. She set the bucket down slowly. "Samuel," she called softly, unsure how she knew his name. The boy tilted his head. "How do you know me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because your footsteps have been keeping me company." He stepped closer, his voice small. "I didn't mean to scare you." She knelt, her heart aching. "You didn't. You've been protecting me, haven't you?" He nodded, eyes shining. "He told me to. He said you'd be lonely." A sob escaped her lips. She reached out a trembling hand, but before she could touch him, a gust of cold wind swept between them, and he faded like smoke into the morning fog. Days later, word reached the woods that Pastor Whitby was visiting families before winter. Martha invited him in, offering coffee and cornbread by the fire. She wanted to tell someone, to unburden the secret, but feared the world's judgment. As he blessed the house, he paused near the ceiling and frowned. "Strange place, this cabin. Feels heavy, but kind." Martha hesitated, then whispered, "Do you believe the dead can linger for love, Pastor?" He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "If love is strong enough to bridge heaven and sorrow, then yes, I believe it can linger. But not to haunt, to guide." That night she dreamed of the pastor's words echoing through her mind, to guide, not to haunt. When she woke, the Bible on her nightstand was open, to a verse she hadn't left it on. Love never fails. For the first time in months, the footsteps in the ceiling stopped. No pacing, no tapping, no whispers. The silence was strange, colder than before. Martha felt an emptiness that made her realize how much she'd come to rely on those sounds. She missed them, as one misses a heartbeat in the dark. She lit her lamp and climbed to the small crawl space again. The bundle, the note, the toy horse, all still there. But now, resting atop them, was a fresh, white feather. She gasped softly, touched it with trembling fingers. There were no birds inside the cabin. It was as if the house itself was saying goodbye. Martha closed her eyes. "Rest easy, both of you," she whispered. "You kept your promise." Winter descended heavy and gray upon the Arkansas woods. Snow muffled the ground and blanketed the cabin roof. Martha spent her days by the fire, writing in her journal about Elias and the boy. She had decided their story deserved to be remembered, not as a ghost tale, but as a story of mercy in secret. Sometimes she thought she heard faint laughter, a child's laugh, when the snow fell thickest. Once, when she looked out at the woods, she swore she saw two figures walking together between the trees, a tall man and a small boy, before they disappeared into the white. She smiled softly, whispering to the glass, "You found each other again." In early spring, old Silas Turner returned. His mule trotted down the road, bells jingling faintly. When he saw Martha, he tipped his hat. "Heard you been living quiet, Miss Langley?" "No more footsteps, I take it?" She nodded with a bittersweet smile. "No more. But I'm not alone either." Silas chuckled. "I told you." Woods like these remember kindness. He helped her repair the porch, and when he climbed up to replace a loose shingle, he paused. "Strange," he muttered. "This here beam's hollow." Martha's heart jumped. "Leave it be," she said quickly. "Let the house keep its secrets." Silas raised an eyebrow, then nodded respectfully. "Aye, ma'am. Some secrets don't need fixin'." That summer, Martha took the unsent letter and the toy horse to the small church in town. She asked the pastor if she might place them beneath the altar, so those who loved in silence may rest in peace. The pastor agreed, eyes soft with understanding. During the small prayer service, the candlelight flickered oddly. Once, twice, as if touched by a gentle breeze though the windows were closed. After the prayer, Martha swore she heard two voices, faint, overlapping, a man's and a boy's, whispering together, "Thank you." No one else seemed to notice. Years passed. Martha grew old, her hair silver, her hands lined from work. Children from nearby farms often visited her, drawn by her gentle smile and the warmth of her stories. She told them tales of the forest, of kindness hidden in strange places, and of a house that once kept love in its ceiling. They would laugh, thinking it a fable, but Martha's eyes always shone with something deeper, a truth they couldn't see. On quiet nights, when the moonlight spilled across her quilt, she'd sometimes hear a single soft footstep above, not haunting but comforting, a reminder. When Martha passed, one cold January morning, the townsfolk gathered to tend her things. A young couple bought the old cabin soon after. They repaired the porch, repainted the walls, and decided to add a second floor for their growing family. But when the builders opened the ceiling, they stopped in astonishment. Inside, though no one had ever seen it, was a tiny space, perfectly preserved, and within it lay a small wooden horse and a note written in delicate, fading script. "For those who love in silence, may your kindness echo through these walls." The couple placed the items on the mantel, feeling an odd sense of peace. That night, as they lay in bed, they heard something faint, the sound of soft, slow footsteps crossing the ceiling above. Not frightening, not heavy, just two sets, one large, one small, walking together side by side into eternity.